I was looking to buy an iPhone 5 about a year ago. I found a guy on Craigslist who was selling his for $200. He claimed it was in mint condition, and he wanted to upgrade to the iPhone 5C, that's why he was selling it. I didn't know much about testing a phone to make sure everything was alright, so I brought my little brother along. He knew a lot more than I did. We met halfway at one of those Dunkin' Donuts at like 10 o'clock at night. Once we pulled into the parking lot of the store, two large, intimidating guys stepped out of a black Honda and walked over to us. One of the guys pulled out the phone and showed it to me. Not a single scratch on it. My brother took out my SIM card and popped it into the new phone. He did the testing and told me that it worked, and that the condition seemed alright. The guy then asked for $250, even though he originally asked for $200. I lied and told him I only bought $200. He seemed a bit unhappy with that. I did have $250, but I didn't want to spend more than the original asking price. I figured it was his way of making sure I didn't hack down the price. Screw it. I handed him $200, and he and his buddy got back in the car. We got back into ours as well. We began testing the phone by calling my girlfriend. I sat there testing for about another 5 minutes. My brother commented on the fact that the two guys hadn't left, just sat in their car. I didn't really care. I started the car and pulled out the parking lot, my brother commenting that the two guys started their car as well. It wasn't too weird at that point. I drove, and eventually I stopped at a red light, and that's where I noticed the black Honda pulled up right behind me. I found that a bit weird, because I was sure they came from the opposite direction. I continued my drive home, but every single turn we met they followed, and close on my tail too. My brother suggested that I pull over, but there was no way I was going to do that. I knew those guys were looking for trouble. It got to the point where I was trying to lose them, and started driving dangerously. If they needed something, they'd call, or at least honk their horn. But they were looking for trouble for sure. I tried something really risky, to try and lose them. At an intersection, the light had just turned red. I drove across the intersection. Before I knew it, the cars began to cross my path. My brother shouted at me, calling me stupid and crazy, but it worked. They hadn't followed. We got home after the long drive. Our hearts were still racing after the intensity of the situation. I was just happy to have a cool new phone for such a low price. Later that night, I was playing on the phone, trying to set some of the things up before going to bed. My parents and brother were already asleep at that point. Just then I heard the sound of a car door slamming shut right outside. I looked out the window, and it felt like my heart stopped. The black Honda was parked across the street. I could assume two guys were already halfway to my front door. I immediately woke up my dad and explained everything as quickly as possible. He got up and got his baseball bat and crouched behind the front door. A loud knock appeared. My dad screamed at them to go away. One of the guys on the other side of the door claimed to have a gun and said that he'd shoot the lock off the door if we didn't open. My dad told me to call Joe, one of our friends who works down at the police office. I called Joe. He said he'd be right over straight away. And here's the part that still scares me to this day. There was the sound of a silent shot of a pistol. I peeked over and saw a hole in the door, inches away from my dad's head. My dad bolted from the door, and we all listened. We heard Joe outside yelling at them to drop their weapons. My dad went outside to help Joe as they lowered their guns. Joe arrested those two arseholes. Gotta say, this was one of the scariest days of my life. I'm a 22-year-old girl. I was looking on Craigslist to buy a couch for my new apartment about a month ago. I found something I thought that seemed like a good deal. From the pictures, the couch seemed to be in great shape. The seller wanted to be contacted by email. From memory, it was something like mexicanpappy666@hotmail.com. I felt that the email was a bit off-putting, but it didn't really matter, to be honest. He responded within about 5 minutes and accepted my offer and proceeded to ask for my address. I honestly felt really uncomfortable of him asking that. I didn't want a stranger coming over to my house. So I suggested that I just come to his house and pick it up, but he carried on insisting that he came to mine. Eventually I stopped responding, and a day later he emailed again, giving me his address. I didn't know if I should go at that point, but it seemed like a sweet deal to pass up. And according to his address, he didn't live that far away either. So I got in my van and drove over to his house. Almost immediately, I noticed that his house was a bit smaller than all the others. When I rang the bell, a middle-aged man wearing a baseball hat answered the door. He gave me a huge smile and invited me in. I was immediately feeling uncomfortable at that point. He led me to his living room, and I saw the couch, and straight away I saw the scuff marks and small tears that weren't in the original picture. I mentioned this to him, and he just smiled and offered me a lower price. I told him I wasn't interested, and here's where things start to get a little bit creepy. As I turned to make my way out of the house, he put his hand on my shoulder and offered to give it me for free if I was willing to give him something in return. I felt disgusted. I knew exactly what he meant. He just had a creepy smile on his face. I let out a disturbed yes, to which he just carried on smiling at. Fuck it, I thought. I bolted to my car and didn't bother looking back. Once I got in my car, I drove away as fast as I could without looking back. However, it doesn't end there. That same night, I was laying in bed watching TV, and I thought I heard someone stomping up the steps of my porch. I muted the TV and was able to clearly hear the sound of someone messing with my front door. I jumped out of my bed and very quietly crept over to the front door. I looked through the keyhole, but whoever it was already gone. That was until I thought I heard the sound of the back gates opening and closing. I immediately grabbed the phone and dialed 911. Soon after, I heard the sound of somebody messing with the back door. I yelled to whoever it was that the police were on their way. And after that, I heard the sound of the gate opening and closing once more. They were gone. It wasn't until the next morning that I noticed a carving on the front door that spelt out, "You're next." I can't sleep at night, and I'm 99% sure it was the man selling the couch on Craigslist. He must have followed me home. There's no way it was just a coincidence. I don't ever plan on using Craigslist anymore. It was my son's 18th birthday. I was looking to buy him a car. I'd spent hours and hours searching, but they were all so overpriced, which was expected, to be honest. Craigslist was the only place to find an actual deal nowadays. I found a car in pretty good condition for only $500. Seemed like an absolute bargain. The seller lived about 10 miles away. It's not too bad of a drive when looking for something like this. I gave him a call to set up a time to come check it out. The guy sounded pretty normal on the phone. He said there'd be no problems with the car whatsoever, and introduced himself as Bob. I pulled up the dirt road towards Bob's property. I was about 15 minutes early, but I didn't think it would matter too much. It was a tiny little house with a decent sized porch. I noticed this because it was out of sync from the others. The garage was open, so I walked over to see if anyone was inside. There was nothing there except for an unusual amount of car parts. Straight away, it felt off. The car was nowhere in sight. The only thing I could see was an old pickup truck, but that looked nothing like the one in the picture. I went on over to the front door to check the house number, just to make sure it was the right address. The doorbell was missing, so I knocked at the door for a good 5 minutes before deciding to give the man a ring. I dialed his number and heard the sound of a phone ringing from inside. I was extremely confused at that point. Now I knew I had the right house. I didn't understand why he wasn't home, and why he wasn't answering the front door. I decided to take a peek through one of the windows and see if anyone was inside. Peering through the glass, I couldn't see much as it was pretty dark in there. I saw a very old-fashioned dining set, but across from that, I saw someone standing at the back door, just staring outside blankly. I figured that must have been Bob. I knocked on the window, but he didn't move. There was no gate or anything to the backyard, it was just wide open. So I simply walked around to the back. I didn't understand how he couldn't hear me. When I got to the back door, I made a shocking revelation. The figure standing by the door was just covered in blood, just standing there. I froze. I could feel a cold sweat coming on. I went straight back the way I came, back into my car. Looked out my window one last time before driving off. The blinds that I'd peeked through had since been shut, but I could see that someone was clearly looking through them, watching me. You could probably guess at that point. I put my foot on the gas and bolted the whole way home. The whole situation still makes no sense to me. All the parts of the car in the garage floor. The fact that there was no car there. That person covered in blood at the back door. Makes no sense to me. I felt sick. Needless to say, I haven't slept well since. And I'm on high alert the whole time. It's safe to say Craigslist isn't exactly a safe place. So please be careful when trying to buy something.